Today I'm going to go ahead and give you a tour of our old $2.99 Oliver planer here. When I've looked up the serial number, I've dated some all the way back to the mid-30s. So I think this thing was made sometime in the late 30s, maybe installed here in the 50s, because I believe this was in production in a wood shop for a while, and then they brought several of these machines, what I'm told, back in the early 50s into this wood shop. So I think I'm gonna have to make a separate video, as this machine has its own sharpening system. There is a motor here. We turn this wheel to bring that motor all the way across and clean the blades up. There's 3 blades on this. The one issue with this saw, or with this planer, is that it is loud. When it is running, it's very loud, and you need ear protection when you're using it. And the one issue is that, like, when we have a lot of people in here and this thing's running all day, it gets really loud in here. So I've looked into possibly converting this to a spiral helical head, which we might end up doing. Issue there is, from what I can see, it looks like it's going to cost about $4,000 to do, somewhere in there. So might be something to do someday, though. But this is a 24-inch planer, one of my favorite tools in the shop. It's a lot of fun to use. And the issue is I have to go home and then use my little DeWalt lunchbox planer when I get there. So I'm going to show you, this is for my students to be able to see what we use this tool for and what we're looking to get out of it. The main thing is we're going to take lumber from our stock up above and we're going to bring it down, and pretty much the first 2 tools that we're going to come to are the planer and the joiner, which I'm going to show a little bit later in this video here. And I'm going to show how to use both of them, and so with no further ado, let's get going. So just to show what we're getting at here, this is a thickness planer, and I'm going to use this machine to take thickness off of a board, off the width. The blades are coming at this at a perpendicular angle in taking off thickness off this. What it's also doing is straightening these boards. Now these boards are pretty good. We get these from a wholesaler here in Illinois. To try and show my point a little bit, it's not much, but there is a little bit of a gap in this piece of poplar here in the center. I'm touching here, I'm touching here. A little bit of a daylight gap there. I don't know how well I can show, but if you see, I can rock this just a little bit. So what we're doing, the way that I like to run these is my high point is here in the middle, and it's, think about like the St. Louis Arch. We're curved this way. So what I want to do is I want to attack the top part. And I always tell my students, think about the mountains and the valleys. Right now, we're wanting to take the mountains off, and we're wanting to cut the mountains off and work from there. So I use that piece of poplar to kind of show what we're using. This is a piece of maple that I'm going to work on today. And you can see this piece actually is in pretty good shape, but you can see a little bit of daylight in there. So that's what we're going to work on taking off and get this down to just a nice workable size. Now, the big thing is, if I'm wanting to get this down, if I want to take a lot of material off this, the planer's fine to do that with, but I'm gonna have to do a lot of work to get this thing down to there. So sometimes you're better off going over and cutting this piece down a little bit and getting it to more manageable size, and then we can resaw it on the bandsaw, or run it through a table saw to take off some thickness if we have to. So, but for the main idea, we're just wanting to square this up. We're going to get all 4 sides cleaned up and squared up. And if you look, see how this is rough sawn? My corners, my ends, my edge is rough sawn. I will use the joiner to get that in better shape for us. So for right now, let's jump on this planer. So I want to point out a couple of things here. This is the bed of the planer. The bed is what moves up and down. My blades are up here, and then we have a chip breaker. This is just our dust collection hood. We have a entire shop dust collection, and so we're pulling air from the top. We have a chip breaker up here. Our roller and our blades are down here, and when we want to change the size, the height, right now I'm going down, my bed is going down for a thicker piece of wood. If I want to shorten this for like the wood I'm gonna run through, I like to get this close, and then I'm gonna show you a couple things that I like to do. You don't want to take off too much material. If you put too much pressure on this tool, just like any tool, you can do a lot of damage to it. So what I want to do is I want to just start, especially on my first few passes, I want to just start taking off some lumber off the top, some material off the top, and square that edge up. So I like to, on this planer, I like to run a pass or two through and get the top started, and then I'll start flipping the board top to bottom as I run it through. I might have to run a board like this through 8, 10, 12 times, maybe more, depending on how bad it is. Quick little pointer that I've picked up on this planer. Instead of trying to eyeball what I want, I will run remember I want to run my crown this way. So instead of running that material through, I will bring this right to here, to this front roller, and then I bring the bed all the way up here until it just starts to grab. That front roller starts to grab my board. So I'm going to keep turning. I'm going to take this. If I can still move this freely, then I'm not in a good enough spot. So I'm going to keep going. It just started to grab right there. So I'm good. Starting to grab. It just takes a little bit of pressure for me to pull in and out, and that's where I want that. That's not going to put too much pressure on the head. So then I'm ready to fire this thing up and run her through. So to get this thing started, our switch is back over here, and I've just got to stop and start. This was installed just last summer. I was having to flip a switch down here, which was not good. That's not a good situation. It was a breaker fuse that I had to flip. So I had them convert to an electric switch here, and we've got this stand all the way up, goes all the way up to the ceiling. It's nice and solid. And so I'll hit the start button when I'm ready. This thing gets loud when I'm running it, and so I'm not going to be able to talk a lot when I'm running it, but I'll run us through and I'll show you a few things that I'm looking at as I'm running. Just ran it through one time and it didn't catch anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this half a turn until I catch wood, and then I'm going to turn a quarter of a turn once I do, okay? I'm also going to run all of my material that is this thickness, I'm going to run it through together. Instead of run one board, get it planed down, then I got to take the bed all the way back and run multiple more boards through. Run them all together at the same time. compare this side, which is the side that just got planed, to this side as far as the roughness. You see some patchiness. You still see a lot of wood in here that's got some fibers that are still kind of torn. Just some, if you run your hand over, you can still feel some up and down. Now, I've got a few more passes to make with this, but this is what I'm looking for, is I'm looking to get a nice flat squared edge on both sides, and then I have a really nice piece of wood to go with. One final thing, if you're running this thing and a board ever gets into here and it gets caught and the rollers aren't pulling it, okay? What I like to do is I like to keep either a waste board or just a second board right behind it that can help push, and as this one gets pushed through, it's gonna push this guy as well. So it's just a quick, easy thing to do. Now that I'm making good contact with my wood, I'm going to turn my wheel a quarter of a turn, and I'm good to go. So one issue that I would like to address real quick on this planer, and I think it's common on most planers, is what is called snipe. And if you can see here on this piece of maple, everything is fine right up until this last 3 to 4 inches here. I also noticed that it really only happened on the walnut as well. Okay, you can see a little bit of chatter marks, but if I run my finger across here, the board is at this thickness, and then it comes in maybe a 32nd of an inch on this one. Different planers are different. Okay, how do you stop this from happening? There's 2 ways that you can do it. If you have a finished length already and you can't take any length off your board, one of probably the best ways to do it is to run a scrap board behind your board that is the same thickness, that will not only help push, but what's actually happening is as your board travels through the planer, when it gets to the end and it's off that final roller, it rolls up, and the blade cuts that last 3 or 4 inches, a 32nd, maybe a 16th of an inch different, because it's not hitting both rollers at the same time. So the easiest way to fix that is to run that through with the same thickness of a board, and that will help keep those rollers together and keep that board together, pushing all at the same time. The way that I like to do it, if you can control it, is to keep your board long during this process. And I typically don't like to use a planer later in my process. I just want to use it to clean my rough stock up. So if I can run my board through and then cut that snipe off, then it's all for the better. And that's a much better, easier, quicker way to deal with snipe. You just have to remember that you're gonna have to cut that board off at the end, which is what I'll have to do, but it's no big deal. For our next tool that we're gonna discuss today is our jointer. Again, another old Oliver joiner. This is an 8-foot bed that we sit on, or an 8-foot table. This is the fence, okay? This is the part that I have to stay tight against to help keep me square. Now what I'm doing is I am cutting the edge of the board. In this particular case, this board is still rough sawn on its edges, as you can see here, if I can get you in the right light. Okay, so now I've squared up my top. squared up my bottom on my planer, and now I'm coming over here to my joiner, and if I eye down this, I have a little bit of wiggle in this, which is natural from the tree, and if you look at the grain lines, we follow the grain line. So what I'm looking to do is I'm going to square this edge up with this joiner, staying tight to my fence. God, do I love this machine. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kick on my dust collector first, pull my dust port open. I'm making sure I'm open here, and I'm going to let it run. So the nice thing about our dust collector is that we have 2 spots in the shop that turns on the central dust collection. We have a spot over by our safety glasses when you first walk in, and we have a spot right back here. So if you're working on the back half of the shop, you don't have to go all the way up to the front of the shop. So all I have to do to turn this on, coming over to this gray box that I've labeled joiner, staying tight to here. See where it's been cut? It's still rough sawn. I'm nice and smooth and cut right here. So that's pretty common with this joiner because I'm uneven, but I have a really nice straight table. And that's what I want. If you can hear, I'm also listening for when it's cutting and when it's not. That tells me whether we're getting straighter. If you notice from your first cut, normally your first cut, you'll catch in a spot, not catch in a spot. So you'll be cutting and you'll not be cutting. So on this one, you'll hear it cut, and then I just keep going until I hear that saw cutting all the way through. Not a saw, until I hear the joiner cutting all the way through. Okay, so I made a full cut there, and if you look through this edge, that's a nice clean square edge. So now I'm clean and square on 3 sides. You'll also notice me hanging on to the board with my hands right now. I like to use my hands as much as possible as long as I can be safe. You'll see me putting my hands on top of this fence to keep my hands out of the way of the cutter head and keeping them safe up top here. If I have to come down to here, I'll go to my push stick. So if I can stay on top of the fence with my hands, that's what I like to do. You'll also notice a couple safety things. There's my cutter head. I'm keeping my hands, I like wearing this apron because it keeps my clothes tight to my body. Also, look at my feet, the positioning of my feet. I'm not too far out in front of the saw where I'm pulling the board through. I'm kind of midway. I'm keeping my feet ahead of my body, and then I roll it through. So now I've got a nice square 4-sided board, and I'm ready to go, and I'm ready to start taking it down and cutting it and assembling it to the sizes that I need. Listen to this longer walnut board. You'll hear it cut, then you'll hear it not cut, and then you'll hear it cut again. And I'll keep doing that until I'm cutting all the way through. Let's do it. at my feet. See how I keep my body on the back half? My feet here, I'm starting here, and then I push through, and I work, I use my feet to go with it. I don't want my feet too far back, and then I'm overreaching. So I'm trying to keep my body in a good position. Now here's the thing, that's off. And if we time it, it's like 3 minutes to turn off. So that's another safety thing that we have to remember. My rule is, if you're using the joiner and you shut it off, you can't leave this until that stops. And yes, it can be 2 minutes or so of you standing here, but when the shop is loud and running and we have 15 people working at the same time, I don't want us to shut this off and then walk away and somebody else can't hear it or see that cutter head running and they walk up and try and jump on it, or they stick their hand down there, whatever. Just stay right here, wait 2 minutes, let that thing shut off, and then you're good to go. My final thing, so I've got a big pile of sawdust here, sawdust here. Do not walk away from these machines when they look like this, okay? I don't care, get this swept off onto the ground, get this swept out of here, and let's get a pile started. I'm fine with the pile if we can centralize all of it. But what I don't like is seeing machines get left like this for the next person to deal with. Get it cleaned off, get it on the ground, sweep it into a pile, and then we'll sweep it all the way over there at the end of the day. So I have glued up these, are actually going to be ceiling fan blades that look like canoe paddles. So what I'm doing is I'm gluing this up, and during my glue up, everything doesn't come out perfectly flat and flush to each other. So I accommodate for that by gluing up a little thicker, and then I run them through the planer to take off that thickness and get everything nice and flat and flush. Five questions. What is the planer used for? Number two, when using the planer, how do we run the board through? Think about smiley face or frowny face. Number three, how far do we turn the wheel on the planer with each pass through? Number four, what is the joiner used for? And number five, true or false? It is okay to run lumber through the joiner with no push stick or push block if you can't keep your hands and your fingers on top of the fence as it's riding through. So answer those 5 questions. Thanks for following along, and we'll see you next week.